Hey, so welcome once again to webinar 1 for the CCUS ZEN project. The format for today's session is going to be a 35 to 40-minute presentation followed by Q&A. You're all welcome to submit questions throughout using the Q&A pane, which does sit separate to the chat if you're unfamiliar with it. And we can filter questions through them, ask them at the end. If you prefer to do questions directly, you can raise your hand and we can do them that way, but please leave the questions for the end. You can submit the text questions at any time and we'll deal with them in the order they arrive. Other than that, I'd like to introduce project coordinator, Eirik Falck da Silva, and I'll hand over to him for the presentation. So,
yep. Thank you,
yours.
Richard. So with that, I'll start sharing my screen. Sorry, that's not my presentation. Yes, so I'm a coordinator of the CCUS ZEN project, and I'm also research manager in SINTEF in Norway. And SINTEF is a R&D organization with very large activities in CCS. We've had that for many years, and my own background is in CO2 capture technologies. So first going sort of generally to the CCUS ZEN project. So this is not like your regular R&D technology development project. It's more a project focused on knowledge sharing, networking, and also identification of promising CCUS value chains in Europe. And this is a EU-funded project, and you see the project duration at the bottom. And we have reached a stage in the project where we've generated quite a lot of results that I will be sharing with you today. And also, if you want further details, we'll be happy to share more. So this goes a bit to the general structure of the ZEN project. And what I want to highlight here is that we are trying to cover all aspects of realization of CCS value chains. So if you look at it, work package 1 is the technical mappings, emission sources, capture technologies, storage sites, transport solutions, and so on. While work package 2 has been handling all the non-technical aspects, societal acceptance, political issues, legal issues, the cross-border aspects of particularly of CO2 transport, and so on. Then based on the data generated in work package 1 and 2, work package 3 is focused on developing promising value chain scenarios. And finally, work package 4 is more focused on detailed studies of 2 chosen value chains. In addition to this, we have work package 5, which is focused on dissemination and knowledge sharing, which is particularly important in a project of this nature. And finally, as always, there's some management to be done. And this, again, goes to the sort of the work we have been doing. So we have the mapping exercises. And in general, we're sort of trying to identify CCS value chains that will have a significant impact, that will contribute significantly to reducing CO2 emissions, and that can be realized with at relatively low cost. So there's a different aspects of mapping, both technical, non-technical, and then sort of trying to come up with a scenario for the value chains and how they will look in an integrated manner, and finally come to some specific business models or business cases. And I'll come back to the regions in Europe we have been focusing on. And at the same time, the general knowledge sharing around this is happening. And yes, I'm assuming most people here are familiar with the general concepts of CCUS. You need your CO2 capture. You will, in most cases, almost all cases, you will need CO2 transport, and that can be normally in form of pipeline transport or ship transport, and mainly for shorter distances, trucks and maybe trains can be considered. And with CCS, you have CO2 storage, which can be offshore, onshore, depleted gas fields or aquifers. And the project also covers the alternative option of CO2 usage. And in recent years, it's become quite common to sort of group CCS and CCU to get into CCS, but it should be kept in mind that there are very distinct options storing CO2 subterraneanly versus finding uses for CO2. And so CO2 uses can be very interesting, but it should be emphasized that as a climate sort of to contribute significantly to reducing global CO2 emissions, CO2 usage is likely to have somewhat limited potential because we are talking about very large CO2 emissions today. Some important messages that to some people may be obvious, but I think it's always important to say these things around CCS. There are proven technical solutions for all aspects of a CCUS value chain. And so you can build these value chains today. A few are in operation and some are in construction. At the same time, as this is obviously an industry in its absolute infancy. So many things have to be figured out and are being sort of figured out today. And I think it's quite important that we try to figure out these things out as efficiently as possible if these types of technologies are to contribute effectively to reducing anthropogenic CO2 emissions. And this is an example on CO2 capture. This is the Petronova CO2 capture plant in Texas, the largest one in the world. I think it's a bit more than 100 meters tall, and which is an operating CO2 capture plant. And on CO2 transport, there's several elements to that: pre-treatment, intermediate storage, loading, transportation, unloading. And there's also the questions of at what pressure you transport the CO2, temperatures, and so on. Also, levels of the impurities in the CO2 is a topic that's attracting quite a lot of attention recently. So there's variations in the complexity here. And as already mentioned, ships, pipelines, rail transport, and combinations of these as main options. The picture is from the Norwegian Northern Lights projects, and this is a digital animation, but this project is very close to being complete now, physically realized. So Norway's first complete CCS. Norway has done CO2 storage already for decades, but this is the first integrated capture, long distance transport and storage value chain for Norway. And then turning a bit to the ZEN project specifically and the partnership. And I will say that I'm very happy with the partnership we have in the project. So we have quite a lot of geological surveys or organizations dealing with geology in respective regions. And the background for that is that CO2 storage is a very region-specific issue. Some countries and regions have very good conditions for storage. In other countries, it's still to be explored and there's significant uncertainties. So to have good regional competence on this topic is quite important. While, for example, on CO2 utilization, that is more of a generic technology. So we have CO2 Value Europe as an entity for CCU and accelerates the French industrial network, also with interest in CCU. And we have specialists in the legal aspects of CCS, and SINTEF as a broad institute with very broad expertise on most of the technical aspects of CCS. And I would also highlight Technip Energies and Rambøll as sort of engineering consultancy companies that make sure that the plans we come up with are like industrially relevant and are genuinely something that can be developed further into real projects after the completion of the CCUS ZEN project. Because that is certainly an ambition for us, is to come up with proposed value chains that may actually be acted upon and realized in the future. And then we also have what is called networking partners. And as you can see here, this is a very broad range of entities with different interests in CCUS, including many of the energy majors. And so essentially any entity is free to join as a networking partner. There's also no cost associated. Essentially, one signs a very simple letter of commitment, and one is invited to our meetings and will have early access to our reports, and networking partners with an active interest in contributing to our discussions are very welcome to do so. So if interested, just let me know after the meeting. And then this was a major choice we made in the beginning of the project. We chose to focus on two regions in Europe, the Greater Baltic Sea region and the Mediterranean Sea region. And around the North Sea, our view was that already the countries there are already doing a lot, and our contribution wouldn't have a significant role. So we focused on less mature regions in Europe at the same time as we are a project with limited resources. So we chose not to try to cover everything. So and this also kind of reflects the countries that we have in our consortium. And then a bit on the sort of development of proposing value chains. So we have the technical mapping, the non-technical mapping, the selection process, and finally reaching the choice of two specific value chains for detailed study. And this shows some illustrations from our technical mapping of emission sources. And this turned out to be a bit more complex than we initially anticipated, because point source emissions, it's hard numbers. One would think that would be easy to obtain, but there's different databases, and some databases count biogenic emissions, others do not. And also there's inconsistency about reporting years and so on. So quite some time was spent on data consistency and quality of data. And for this, we work together with a startup company called Indrava, and they have a map of CO2 emissions developed for the purpose of CCS and CCU. And then there's the mapping of storage potential, which has different complexities, and which we're to greater extent anticipating, because in some regions there is good knowledge, but in regions where there's not prior activity in oil and gas, there may be less data on the geological formations, and to predict storage potential is not always easy if there's not a lot of detailed geological data available. So we have some parameters, predictions of storage capacity, and what's called storage readiness level, which is kind of equivalent to technology readiness level for storage. And also we have some tools that we are borrowing from work done in other projects to look at the different options for CO2 transport. And we also have some mapping tools to sort of combine this. And also this is a specific goal in the project to come up with recommendations for projects of common interest, which will typically be shared infrastructure for the transport of CO2. And yes, so once we had gone through the exercise of identifying storage sites, and emission sources and the size of the emission sources, we started to do the exercise of what are the best ways of combining this into cost-efficient value chains. And here you see listed the countries for the Baltic Sea region, and sort of and the various regions will focus for more detailed development of value chains. And here you see examples of starting to play with combining emissions from different sources to one storage site. And similarly, and we were considering both offshore and onshore storage. And also defining the Baltic Sea region liberally, so including quite extensively parts of Poland and northern Germany. And again, you see examples of trying to connect the dots, so to speak, on storage and emissions. And then the non-technical mapping, because the legal, the regulatory framework, the political support for CCS varies very substantially from country to country in Europe. So we did similar mapping exercises. And I've had webinars on that. And there's also some legal frameworks regarding pollution and management of the seas that has implications for CCS value chains. So this is going through some of those regulations. And from this, here I'm showing some specific examples of some of the value chains that were considered. And here you can see this identification of clusters, and that was a focus to get this. There's benefits of scales in CCS. So if you can identify large clusters of emitters, and you can have joint transport infrastructure to a single storage site, then we sort of view that as being likely to be more cost effective. And here there are examples of what would be potentially be some very large clusters. So in the project, we started by designing 8 value chains, 4 for the Baltic Sea region and 4 for Mediterranean region. And in the end, we were going to have 1 from each region for detailed study. And we had a meeting last fall in which we went together as a group looking at all the options. And we didn't have any sort of strict quantitative criteria for like voting on which one we went for. But on the whole, we were trying to look for value chains that would have a large impact and that looked realistic, and also maybe did not have excessive risk in terms of political support. Like if there was countries where CCS is still prohibited, for example, then that's a high risk. So this is one of them, Baltic 2, which is a very large, which was also one of the backgrounds for choosing this. It's a very, very large value chain. And it also includes multiple countries, which we also thought was interesting to study in this project, to explore any potential barriers to CCS value chains, including multiple countries in Europe. And yes, and this is the Mediterranean case that was chosen, and we're still iterating on the final form of this, but it will combine. So you have emissions from France, particularly on the Marseille region, and potentially extension to Lyon, and then you have emissions in Spain, and offshore storage off the coast of Tarragona. And what is a challenge in the Mediterranean compared to the greater Baltic Sea region or the North Sea is that the data on storage is much more limited, and to the extent that it is there, it is to a large extent commercially confidential. It belongs, so there's energy majors that have data, but that are not currently sharing. So we've been wrestling with the size of the storage site, and if it's big enough to accommodate all these emissions. But right now we believe it to be large enough. But for the Mediterranean, we view it as something quite urgent to get more data in the public domain on storage potential in different parts of the Mediterranean. And here we did also break down these different clusters by industries, because obviously for CCS investments, one would like to have a long-term view on this and kind of certainty that these emitters will remain there for long-term into the future. A project like this, if you want to invest in CCS, I think you want at least something like a 20-year perspective. And then it's good to know that the industries will remain there. And then we didn't try to speculate on the lifetime of specific factors or anything like that, but just having this industrial mapping, we think is good background information. So some reflections from this, from our work. So deployment of CCS is intended to accelerate quickly. If you look at the goals of the European Union and member countries, the number of capture plants that is supposed to build, the number of storage sites that is intended to become operational, it's very substantial numbers. Some of this is supposed to be in place by 2030. So yes, this needs to accelerate. And in the project, we've had discussions and we've had physical meetings with people with authorities from different countries. At the last meeting, we had people from the Danish government, we had representatives from the Netherlands, and different countries have approached the funding of these projects differently. And I do think it's one of the key questions going forward is to have the best possible incentive regime to encourage the best projects to move forward. And as already touched upon, we do see that in parts of Europe, the knowledge of CO2 storage potential is very limited, and that might be, that has the risk of slowing down projects, because if you have all the emitters, the ambitions to do CCS, but if you do not have storage potential in the local region, then it may take significantly more time to develop. And also, I touched upon the point of this being an industry in its absolute infancy. And one aspect of that is that you have many different stakeholders. You have national government, regional government, port authorities, technology vendors of capture, technology vendors for transport, storage operators, the companies that are emitting CO2 and that want technical solutions for their CO2 emissions. And for all of these entities, different stakeholders to find a role in this is still something that needs to be developed and still feels unclear and varies from country to country and how this is starting to move. Yes, and so we are some way into the project, but we are will be running for the rest of this year and into next year, and we aim to have we'll have further webinars, and we'll also have more physical meetings in the ZEN projects, and we welcome new people to join. This is a picture from our last physical meeting held a couple of months ago in Madrid. And then I moved through this more quickly than I anticipated, but that will leave more time for questions, and I'll be happy to go into more detail on any of this if there's interest. So that's...
Thank you, Eirik, for your presentations. So for everyone, we have the available Q&A pane if you'd like to submit text questions. What I'll do just now is I'll enable the microphone for attendees. As a kind reminder, please ensure that your microphone remains muted unless you're speaking. And if you have any questions for Eirik, please, you can also use a hand raising, and we'll take the questions in the order they appear. Eirik, for your benefit, you probably in the presentation, there's not been anything on the Q&A pane just yet. Okay. And just a couple of messages on the chat about the sound, which I'm hoping was okay for everyone else, and I'm hoping it was sorted for the person who had that issue. But yeah, we will now open for questions for 15-20 minutes. Oh, sorry, I've raised my hand. So any questions for Eirik, please use your hand raising feature or send questions via the Q&A.
We have one hand up.
Yeah. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much, Eirik, for the talk. It's Guillermo Martinez here from the JRC in the European Commission. I would like to know more about the technical mapping of emitters. What do you think were the bottlenecks? You mentioned some of them, but
Yes.
Is this mapping finalized? Do you think it can be improved? Is the information available? So yeah, a bit more on that. Thank you.
Yes, so we do have our first deliverable. We have a very solid, it's 100 pages plus of like maps and this. So CCUS ZEN deliverable 1.1, where we do have these multiple maps from different countries, and we have sort of the emitters listed. So the challenges, and a major one, and I touched a bit on it, is that in many countries, for the purpose of reporting your emissions to the environmental authorities and so on, it's only your fossil CO2 emissions that count. But for the purposes of studying the potential for CCS, biogenic CO2 capture is equally interesting. So for a mapping of potential CCS value chains, you would like to see the total CO2 emissions. And then you have the fact that some databases are giving you just the fossil and others are giving you the total. So that is certainly one challenge. And I also touched upon this, that the different data are from different years. So just the consistency, and also this thing that, so you have different industry, obviously in clusters, and to what extent the industries, the CO2 emissions, are they going down? Is the factory going to remain there? Is it changing? Was that year of reported CO2 emissions, was it representative? Did anything happen in particular that year? So I would say that was, we spent significantly more time on that exercise than we were expecting. And we were also finding inconsistency between the maps of this startup company and the knowledge we have from our partners in the different countries. So there was the quality control on the data, and this turned out to be something. So to have good databases for this, yes, it is clearly of interest. But there's so we do have the report is out. It is available. So we can share that. And yeah, I can just add a comment to that. And we had a discussion with our EU-funded project, and we have our EU project officer, and we had a discussion about where CCS should be applied. Because one has what's called the hard to abate industries like cement and so on, that you anticipate will need CCS way into the future. And you have other industries where it's a bit less clear, like if you have power production, should we have CCS on power production or not? Do we expect renewables to take over power production completely? And different countries also have different views on this. So this questions regarding CCS on power, CCS on refineries, should that be prioritized or not? That is, I think that's quite a big policy question. Other questions?
I'll take the moment to mention webinar 2. In the meantime, Eirik, and if anyone has any questions, again, feel free to just use the hand raising. But webinar 2 we have coming up on the 30th of May, and that's on high-level technical screening of promising CCUS value chains. which is a lot of the work carried out by work package 1. I'm going to go ahead and put in the chat information about that. There's details on there on the CCUS ZEN website. There's a link to register as well. It'll be a similar format as today, but maybe feature 1 or 2 presenters in there, and that will show the results from the work carried out in there. We'll give another few minutes in case anyone else has any questions.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can add if you think of any questions later, we have our website and my contact information, so feel free to contact us later.
Yes, thanks for that, Eirik. Okay, so if there's no further questions, the information's on the CCUS ZEN website. There's information about networking partners as well that Eirik mentioned. And if you're interested in joining as a networking partner, feel free to send an email as well. The contact details are on the website. So thanks everyone for attending. Thank you, Eirik, also for the presentation to introduce the project. We have that webinar 2 coming up on the 30th of May. That's a Thursday. And this will be the second one in a series of webinars that will carry us through to the end of the project. And as a reminder, a recording of today's webinar will be available on the website. So check back on the event page and you'll be able to see a recording for that. So once again, thank you all and have a great rest of the week.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Eirik. Thanks, everyone.